Dark Reign is an intriguing game. One that by all accounts did extremely well, but just couldn't capitalize on its success. It was released in the early golden age of strategy games, just as the genre was burgeoning into the behemoth that it would become in the late 90s and early 2000s, where series like Age of Empires, Command & Conquer, and Warcraft were putting their stakes in the ground. Dark Reign sought to mark its own territory and stand alongside them as one of the big players going into the new millennium. Hitting shelves in 1997, Dark Reign took inspiration from Command & Conquer, but brought genuine advancements to the genre in its mechanics and gameplay, along with its unique vibe and setting that helped it stand out from the crowd. It did well enough that a full expansion was warranted, with Dark Reign: Rise of the Shadowhand being released to reviews befitting its progenitor just a year later. The game was developed by Australian company Auran Development as their debut title. Auran had been founded just 2 years earlier in 1995, and after impressing Activision with a demo, they secured a publishing deal and subsequently shifted 500,000 copies within 2 years. An impressive achievement, with Activision at the time crowning Dark Reign its fastest seller ever, breaking company sell-through records worldwide. I mean, sure, it couldn't touch Command & Conquer, with Red Alert selling over 3 times the amount in its launch window the year prior, but that's a game in an established franchise from a veteran developer. Auran had come out swinging with their debut title and a brand new IP, from little old Australia no less. Dark Reign performed exceptionally well, but for one reason or another, it totally failed to become a serious competitor in the strategy genre. A sequel was released in 2000, developed by Pandemic Studios as their sophomore game, yeah, that one, but despite reviewing well, its sales were bad, and I mean really, really bad, probably even worse than NetStorm, and that's saying something. Must have been a dark couple of years there for Activision, especially with their 90s bankruptcy still in their memory. Meh, I'm sure they quickly forgot about it. It's not obvious why developer change was warranted for the sequel. There was clearly some sort of backroom politics going on here that caused Auran to not develop it. Because if you don't know, Pandemic was founded a year after Dark Reign launched, with many original Dark Reign developers among its staff. I'm pretty certain that Activision owned the IP and they wanted a sequel. Perhaps Auran didn't want to do it, and that's why Pandemic picked it up. I'm not exactly sure. I've heard that there were potentially some management issues which caused a staffing exodus, but I can't find any real sources to back that up. Whatever the case, Auran was happily preoccupied with their new train simulator, which you might be interested to know is still going. Yes, the company that tried to go up against RTS industry stalwarts in the 90s is still around, creating trains. Though, in fairness, it's not anywhere close to the same company that it was when it made Dark Reign. They went through some serious issues after basically strangling themselves when they overextended into developing an MMO. You remember back in the day when everyone wanted their own World of Warcraft. Needless to say, like every other WoW killer, Fury completely imploded, and Auran was restructured, renamed, received significant outside investment, and yeah, now they just make trains. Not to take anything away from them, of course. There are a lot of people who like trains.
Train simulator, bitch, motherfucker!
Look, it's an interesting history, but let's get back to Dark Reign. It's another story for another day. During the mid-2000s, Dark Reign existed as one of the many RTSs created during the genre's big boom in the 90s. Strategy games had been pumped out at pace for years, and it hadn't been long enough for computer hardware and software to evolve to the point where running these old games would be a problem if you wanted to replay them. But with another decade of age, things were starting to crack. New versions of Windows were proving difficult for the aging software, and it was becoming rarer and rarer to both have a disk drive and also have a copy of any of these older games on disk at all. In Dark Reign's case, Good Old Games did end up offering it digitally in the early 2010s, but they hadn't fixed any of the technical issues. Namely, the fact that it wouldn't work on a modern computer, a slight problem. They would of course go on to solve these issues, and around the same time in 2017, a revival of Dark Reign began to take shape. A community patch was developed, website created, and Discord server spun up. While the stock GOG version now worked without issue, the patched version was unquestionably better, with an expansive game launcher, numerous bug fixes, restored cut content, and even an integrated, functional multiplayer system. Unless there's ever an official remaster or remake, this is the definitive way to play Dark Reign. All the footage you're seeing in this video is taken from the patched version, and apart from footage from the original campaign, all the rest of the footage, so skirmish and multiplayer, is from Rise of the Shadowhand. While it may not hold the same prestige nowadays as games like Command & Conquer or Warcraft, Dark Reign remains an intriguing game, with a small but dedicated community who surrounds it to this day. A product made in the first real boom of real-time strategy, the true Wild West of RTS development. We're a new studio in the burgeoning Australian game development scene will try and take the fight to the big names of the genre, to make a splash and take the popularity crown moving into the new millennium. This is Dark Reign, the Future of War, 26 years later. The Command & Conquer inspirations are obvious in Dark Reign's design, though in fairness that was kind of the style of the day. I think it looks better than most other games of the time though. Firstly, the terrain is varied and it doesn't have the issue that some other games do of the tile sets just looking like a repeated 1x1 square across the entire map. There's good variety with the different types of terrain spread around, which not only looks great but it has gameplay implications too, which we'll talk about a bit later. The unit models are equally good and they're surprisingly well animated, while the icons do leave a little bit to be desired. Once you've got them out of the conceptual realm and into the field, they look really cool. All four factions have a good spread of units with only a few double ups for lore reasons, and they hold up really well, as do the buildings. And yeah, they don't have quite the same pizzazz as Command & Conquer games, especially in terms of their animations like the pack up and pack down. But they look great, and they have quite a vibe going on, especially like this one that's on the front cover. This looks awesome. And yeah, I mean, like, they aren't photorealistic or anything, and you can literally, see the pixels, but they fit the style and they're easily identifiable, which is a lot more important than trying to make them overly fancy. The best thing about the visuals are the effects. These are really good. Weapons fire hammers between units smoothly and often, and explosions aren't like boneless little pops, they have some real punch. And infantry just detonate into giblets when you kill them, which caught me off guard. This is pretty gnarly, especially with the shredder unit that just like mows through infantry and just cuts them up. Yeah, pretty dark. It's all part of the vibe, man. And of course, like any game, the audio plays a huge role in this too, and here in Dark Reign the soundtrack is a particular standout. It's kind of brooding, it's a bit dark, it's not afraid to get a beat going too. I'm surprised at how much I liked it. I really didn't expect it to go this hard. It kind of gives me Tiberian Sun vibes, which I'm sure you'd agree is quite a compliment. Honestly, the whole soundscape is fantastic. Music, sound effects, voice acting, the whole lot. As far as 90s RTSs go, I reckon Dark Reign is one of the best in terms of overall presentation. I mean, here's that word again. Vibe. Dark Reign is set far into the future, with the player character being one of the last survivors of the Togrins, after they were nearly entirely obliterated, being caught in the middle of a civil war between the game's two playable factions, the Freedom Guard and the Imperium. Now you may be wondering, rightly so, how are the playable factions separate from the player faction? Well, you see, as one of the last survivors of your civilization, you basically get the chance to go back in time, to prevent the destruction of your race by defeating the two clashing factions on your planet. But there's a catch to this, as there always is with time travel. The tech that allows you to go back in time can only be used once, and if you fail in your grand mission, that's it, you're cooked, there's nothing you can do. So to prove that you're worthy to go back in time, you need to do so through a series of trials that can be played from either perspective of the two warring groups. If you do this, and then, like I said, prove yourself worthy, then you can go back in time, save the day, and prevent all this destruction from ever happening. And that takes place in the game as the final mission. In a way, I do kind of wish that developers had the confidence to make this final mission a one-time thing, like an Iron Man mode. Like, imagine if you do it and you fail, and then the game's just like, well, you failed, we said you'd only get one chance. That would be pretty ballsy, but yeah, I guess I can understand why they didn't do that. Anyway, the expansion continues the story from the end of the original game, and it assumes that the time travel was a success. It also introduces two new factions, who are spin-offs from the Freedom Guard and the Imperium, which are the Zenite and the titular Shadowhand respectively. The main campaign contains 13 missions, with the expansion bringing another 14, which is 7 for both new factions, and like I said, each mission in the base game can be played from both perspectives, except for the last one, which is the travel back in time one. So that means that Dark Reign plus Rise of the Shadowhand has a grand total of 37 missions. Not bad. I quite like how the main campaign setup is handled lore-wise, because while I do kind of find the idea of playing through simulations to be a bit of a downer narratively, being able to play both sides and win without having catastrophic immersion-based consequences for allowing that, I think is a fair trade-off. You know, in fact, it's kind of the opposite from being a downer. Thanks to the presentation of the vibe, you really do get the feeling that you're the guy who's been chosen to take up this crucial task. It's quite a cool feeling, you're the one.
You are the man.
It's basically the perfect example of rationalizing the UI and game interface to exist in the first place and not just be this like conceptual thing that you interact with the game with. And I'm impressed with the commitment to this aspect in the game. As for mission designs, overall I found them pretty engaging, and I was surprised about how little it relied on the standard like go and destroy the enemy base style of objective, especially for a game this old. There are often different objectives that need to be completed, occasionally with some unique mechanics, and playing the same mission from different factions' perspectives gives a great opportunity to see things in a different way. The objectives in these cases are often vastly different, which really does help to make it feel like you're playing two different scenarios and not just one scenario with two different factions. And also it's like quite hard, like it's really challenging in some places. I mean, I guess that was kind of the way for many 90s RTSs. And I can't really say how much of it I can put down to the lack of gameplay and technical comforts that I'm used to from modern games, like muscle memory hotkeys, more helpful UIs, and a more zoomed out camera, versus the actual gameplay difficulty. I'd say it's a mix of both, but yeah, either way you look at it, the game's pretty hard. Like a lot of RTSs of the time, Dark Reign is a purely action-focused experience. There's no diplomacy, and no research or civic aspects. It's all about harvesting resources, building your key structures, and deploying a range of troops to eliminate the enemy. It's fast-paced, and you shouldn't expect a lot of downtime, because there really isn't any. Maps are pretty small, units are trained and killed quickly, and a lot of the time credits are plentiful. This absolutely makes for a game that will keep you on your toes, but I also found it to be one that doesn't ask for a lot of personal investment, which took away a bit of the connection for me. You kind of just get in there, build your army, and attack. There's not a lot of build-up, or investing in your troops or anything like that. The game features 3 resources: power, water, and credits. Power is needed to run the minimap, as well as keep buildings and defences at full capability. Generators provide a base amount of power, which can then be increased by harvesting Talon deposits across the map. Water is also collected in a similar way, but you don't actually use it. Once your water tanks are full, the water is then shipped off-world for credits, which you can then use to fund your buildings and units. And you can also sell the water early at a cost to get your credits earlier than usual. You can see your progress to your next shipment in this wee bar down here. I like what Dark Reign does with resources because it puts in the effort to make them unique. They aren't just stockpiles to harvest and deplete. Each has their own mechanics and intricacies to manage that make them more interesting. Just little things like how Talon and water deposits slowly replenish over time and can never be fully exhausted, and how the water to credit system works, and how harvesting Talon is sort of optional until you really need higher outputs, because you can just build more base generators for a little bit more power. There are also things like the water contamination unit that can be used as an actual resource denial strategy, which is really interesting. And it all adds up to a resource system that seems kind of simple on the surface, but it's surprisingly deep, with a lot of fun strategies and gameplay styles that can be built around them. The unique setups continue with some of the game's more interesting units and buildings. Don't get me wrong, a lot of what the factions get to use are the same tanks, infantrymen, turrets, and facilities that you've seen in countless other games, but even in those cases, I reckon the designs hold up their stock standard mechanics. But it starts to get really different at the periphery, the fringe, with units like the Infiltrator, a unit that can steal technology from enemy buildings to use for yourself, or even grant you vision of their minimap, which is super cool, or the Terraformers that were introduced in the expansion, which can change the terrain type to benefit certain units, or the Temporal Gate, which can teleport a few units anywhere on the map instantly, no questions asked. Every game needs its basic stuff, of course, tanks and soldiers and the like, but Dark Reign surprised me with how unique its mechanics are. While the factions do share a lot of their initial classes of unit and structures, kind of like how they do in Command & Conquer, they diverge early on with multiple different stats, strengths, and weaknesses, and the gap only widens once you get into the advanced trees as you upgrade your buildings and bring out the big guns. Quite literally, in some cases. Back in the day, one of Dark Reign's big selling points were its advanced unit controls and behaviour management mechanics. These were really advanced for the day, and in some cases, they're still quite distinctive in 2023. At a basic level, Dark Reign offers fine control over unit pathing that simply had not been seen before in RTS, and the impacts of these intelligent innovations can still be seen in games today. Do you like queuing Age of Empires units with the simple method of holding the shift key? Well, tip your hat to Dark Reign, because the first rudimentary examples of this are here in their own bespoke menu. You can set individual or groups of units to simply follow a predetermined path to, say, avoid the cone of fire from an enemy emplacement, or perform more complex actions like patrol a permanent route and only deviate when an enemy enters their line of sight. And that leads us well into behaviours, which are really interesting. Essentially, they're a way to broadly set how units act on their own without direct intervention from the player, using a few different parameters. Units' overall behaviour is determined by setting their pursuit range, their damage tolerance, and independence. Pursuit range determines how long units will follow an enemy for, damage tolerance dictates when a unit will retreat based on the amount of damage it's taken, and independence allows units to make their own decisions and stray from set orders to engage enemies. And there are 3 orders you can give units for them to go and do their own thing. Scout will just try and explore, Harass will seek out enemies and harass them for as long as possible, and Seek and Destroy will actively seek out and neutralize enemies. Some examples of how these orders and behaviours work together then are as follows. A unit set to Scout, low pursuit range and low damage tolerance but high independence means it will be very inclined to pursue an enemy unit if it encounters one on its search, but it will disengage very quickly and return to its job if it can't secure a kill, basically instantly. Alternatively, if you've got a unit set to Search and Destroy with a high pursuit range, high damage tolerance, but low independence, it'll basically go pitbull mode and chase enemy units down until it or them die. It's a great system, and there's a lot you can do with it. But if you're not willing to give it the time of day, there's a few presets for the most common settings, which is a great way to let you interact with it without needing to think about it too hard. Lastly, Dark Reign was also the first RTS ever to include a true 3D terrain system, meaning hills and mountains now affected how units behaved and engaged with each other. It's old news nowadays, of course, but back in the 90s, having line of sight and unit locomotion be tied to the terrain height was quite the advancement. It made Fog of War much more complex than it ever had been, which added a whole new gameplay layer to consider and think about. And even different unit types were affected by different types of terrain, in terms of speed or even being able to cross it at all. And yes, if you're typing out how you thought Total Annihilation was the first game to have a 3D terrain system, you're almost right. Dark Reign actually beat it by just a couple of weeks. Now, obviously Dark Reign has a skirmish mode where all these mechanics can be enjoyed, but I think the campaigns actually have it beat for solo play. The mission scenarios and narrative backbone are crucial for giving you goals and intent, and I just think Skirmish kind of lacks that from where I'm sitting. I don't think it has enough going for it to justify it, where I think you'd be better off just playing the campaign instead. Something like Warzone 2100 is a good example of the opposite, where its unit design mechanics that allow for massive variety don't need a unique mission structure or story to keep it interesting. And look, I'm not saying Dark Reign solo skirmishing isn't fun, it can be for a while, I just don't think it's super replayable on its own. But thankfully, there's multiplayer to spice things up. Usually for games of this age, enjoying multiplayer is left to playing with whichever mates you can convince to play a game or two over a virtual LAN service like Game Ranger. But like some of its luckier contemporaries, Dark Reign has been graced with community support that enables seamless online multiplayer, as well as people to play it with. More on that soon. And while I did have some fun in Skirmish, this is absolutely the better way to play, thanks to the ease of which it's able to be played via the community patch. That is what I would like to say, though in practice it's not actually quite that easy, not as easy as I'd hoped anyway. I gave it a crack with some of the lads from our Discord server, and there were some proper issues with joining games that seemed to be based on our geographical locations. We were able to get into a game with 3 of us all using VPNs to get into the same region, in this case the UK, but our pings were comically high, so much so that simply positioning units took a godlike level of foresight. It was still fun despite the issues, but it's certainly a mark against it if you're looking to play with people from across the world. After this, I did try a few tour-player games with my mate from Australia, and we had a much better time. I did still need to VPN to Sydney, but he was already there, so he didn't need to VPN, and it turned out our pings were quite reasonable, in the 100 to 200 milliseconds. It was an all-around improvement, it was quite a fun and nostalgic co-op romp. I quite liked it. Usually, installing and running a 26-year-old game isn't very easy. But for Dark Reign, that's not the case, because I was able to download and start playing Dark Reign from Good Old Games immediately, without any hassle at all. Admittedly, if you've got an original disc copy lying around, it might not be this simple, but you could patch it up to work. Regardless, this is still pretty impressive. Nice job, GOG. You can buy the base game and expansion for $5 or $10 or something, and choose to download it either with no DRM or through the GOG launcher. I love what GOG does, and it's in these examples where they truly shine. A game that's over a quarter century old, that's downloadable and purchasable DRM free, that works easily on modern hardware and operating systems. What's not to love? I will mention that even though it's not an issue now, there were a lot of complaints that the game did not run on Windows versions past Windows 7 with the GOG release, but like I mentioned at the start, that is fixed now. So maybe if you tried to play it a few years ago with this version and it didn't work, you might want to give it a try now, and it probably will. The previously mentioned player's patch can be applied to this version, or the CD-ROM version if you still have it. But there is another option, because you can choose to download a version that includes the full game via the patch website, bypassing the need to have your own copy. Now you may be asking,
was all this legal? Absolutely fucking not.
but I'll let you decide if that's an issue. I mean, it's a super old game, and personally, I'd be floored if any of the money buying it now went to any of the original developers and not just Activision, since they published it and they own the IP. So let's just leave it at that. The community is decently large, with the Dark Reign Discord server quoting over 1,600 members. Obviously not every one of those would be down for a multiplayer game if you were to ask them, but they have unique roles for regulars who play often, and I'm sure they would be more than happy to show you the ropes or bring you into the fold. There's even regulars who play the sequel if you're into that. Among other things, there's also some great resources for how to download, install, and get both games running, so if you're wanting to play Dark Reign in any capacity today, this is probably the best place to get started. In getting the player's patch installed, there's also the Evolution of Zenite mod if you want to give that a try, which is basically the biggest mod out there for Dark Reign. And I'd be remiss to not shout out the Creation Kit, which is included in the base game, which still works flawlessly and gives tons of options for making your own maps and missions. Lastly, before we wrap here, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Dark Reign Redux, a truly bizarre project that seems to have been forgotten by pretty much everyone, except for a few people in the Dark Reign Discord. No one in my Discord or in my community post even knew what it was. So from what I can gather, Dark Reign Redux was a modern re-release / remaster of the original game released exclusively on the Xbox Live Arcade store for the Xbox 360 in 2012. Apart from a demo which was also available through a web browser using the now very dead Microsoft Silverlight framework, which was like a Microsoft version of Flash. I told you it was weird. It was created by Magnetar Games, who are a Canadian studio who made a deal with Activision to bring the game to Xbox, and at the same time increase the game's resolution, add widescreen support, which I wish was on PC, as well as some kind of crossplay between home, console, and mobile. But I have just absolutely no idea what this means, because the full release never made it past the Xbox, and it seems to be completely unavailable today. Any web links outside of a few from the Wayback Machine are just completely balked, dead, and the only footage I can find online is by a couple of different smaller YouTube channels from like 10 years ago. There were also some older messages in the Dark Reign Discord from a guy who was trying to port it to PC, but it doesn't look like that made it very far. So yeah, I would log this whole thing as missing in action. And before you ask, yes, I did try and load the web-based demo through the Wayback Machine on PC, but I just cannot get it working. You need Microsoft Silverlight to run it, but Silverlight is long discontinued. And if you want to run old Silverlight apps, you need to run it through Internet Explorer, but it has to be a separate version of Internet Explorer that also is not supported anymore. You can't run it through the Microsoft Edge Internet Explorer, like virtual system, whatever they do. And the Windows Explorer version that it needs doesn't work on Windows 11. It only works on Windows 7, I think. So yeah, I think it's cooked. Look, if you can get it running, or you have it running, or you've ever played it, or you even know what it is, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. So then, should you play Dark Reign? Well, yes and no. Like most of the conclusions to these videos, it sort of depends on who you are. If you're someone who's interested in playing some classic titles, or finding an older game with a community of people to get involved in, then yeah, 100% you should play Dark Reign. It's easy to download and get running, there's a great community, and even if you just want to play solo, it's still fun for what it is. It's got a decent campaign, the story is, yep, it's fine, it's nothing amazing, but it's there. The vibe's great, the atmosphere is awesome, the cutscenes are a bit of fun, and surprisingly high budget considering the circumstances around the game's development. I do wish there was more of them though. But if you're just a regular old RTS gamer looking for something new to play, then there are probably better, newer options out there for you. If that's you, then you can check out my Guide to RTS video, which might be able to give you a few answers. Dark Reign was good for its time, and it introduced a ton of innovative mechanics to differentiate itself from the pack. But it's 26 years old. It's one of the many pretty good, but not excellent RTS games released over the past 10, 20, 30 years. And from where I'm sitting, if you're wanting specifically to play a classic RTS, and you don't really care what it is, then I'm not sure I'd ever recommend Dark Reign over a contemporary like Age of Empires or Command & Conquer. But let me know what you think in the comments. Am I off base here? Do you think Dark Reign is one of the best RTSs of its time and still worthy of that title today? And should it be held in such high regard as is Age of Empires and Command & Conquer? I would love to hear your thoughts, so let me know. And thank you so much for watching, and thanks to my YouTube members and Patreon supporters who keep the lights on here and support what I do. That's Takayo, Nintendo, Bad Ghosts, Sean, Greyspirit4, George, Nedders, John Kaiser, King Thickums, Pavel, Bram, Christian, Dan4, Vicious Arch, Orion, and Das Roofkin, and my Paladins, Johnny, Marika, Age of Cause, Joe, Tank, and Empyrean. Thanks very much. What's your favourite genre / band right now, and where would you want to travel if you could go anywhere? Poland, that would be probably up there. And favourite genre or band, I go for most genres, so favourite band I'll give you Three Teeth or Health right now would be my top two. What game would you like to see revived that got shut down and is no longer playable? Probably like Star Wars Galaxies. I never played it, but I heard it's really good, and I know it's like there's like a fan revival, I think, but yeah, that would probably be my top choice. What do you call the thing you put bacon and egg in? Similar to a burger bun, that's a bacon butty. Where's the beef? On a trebuchet going to your castle right now. Which Final Fantasy generation have you grown up with, or have you not played any Final Fantasy game before? It would be the latter. I've never played a Final Fantasy game before. A friend almost convinced me to play FF14, but there was no time and I didn't. So maybe I should play one? Let me know if you think I should. Since we're in the spooky season, any ghost or supernatural encounters you want to share? And you can tell how long this video has been in development. Yeah, I have one. So me and a friend were staying over at each other's place back when we were like 10, and we saw this like white face out on the street, and then a bus came past and he was gone. And what's weird about it is we both swore that we saw this, and we never found an explanation, obviously. And yeah, that kind of freaked us out for a while. What are your favourite Command and Conquer factions for each universe? Tiberium, Alert, Generals. Tiberium is definitely the Steel Talons because of the Wolverine and the Titan and stuff. Red Alert, probably the Japanese from Red Alert 3, just because their vehicles and units are so cool. And Generals, I always like the GLA, just because of some of like the insanity of their vehicles. And that's all. Thanks again very much for watching. See you next time.